Hello and welcome to this lecture on monitoring and evaluation. So it is nice to meet you after a long time through this discussion, and we are going to carry forward with the third unit for our paper Research Monitoring and Evaluation, and we are now going to talk about monitoring and evaluation. So this is the first part of the lecture, where we will try and understand the context within which we are looking at monitoring and evaluation. So the first thing that we need to understand and be clear about is that now we are looking at a C4D project. So what we are going to talk about is basically project monitoring and evaluation. So we start our lecture on monitoring and evaluation of a particular project. So first we have to understand and look at the C4D Process Pyramid. When we look at a C4D campaign, what are the essential steps that we are looking at? So the essential steps of a C4D project implementation are, as you see, and we will start from the bottom of the pyramid, which is a communication based assessment, next strategy design, activities implementation, monitoring and evaluation, and result. Now let us go through these steps of the pyramid one by one. So the first step, which is the communication based assessment. You are familiar with the terminology situation analysis. So what do we do in situation analysis? That is where we are before starting a project, we understand the situation, the context within which we are going to do our C4D campaign. So communication based assessment is basically trying to understand that process as to where and how the entire project is located. Then comes the strategy design. That means where we develop the strategy for the C4D project, and then we implement it, which is the activities implementation following the particular strategy. And then comes monitoring and evaluation, and finally the result. That means the outcome of the project, where we are going to see the intended outcome of the particular project that we have taken up, or the change that we have been looking forward for. Now let us take a look at the same thing from a different angle, and as you see here, we have the first step, which is the communication based assessment. Now what happens in this at this particular level? So we are trying to identify, analyze, refine the audience's, stakeholders' risks, opportunities, needs, solutions, media channels, the M&E indicators, the objectives. Now understand the significance of this particular step. So we are basically identifying the objectives, we are looking at the risk, we are looking at the opportunities, we are trying to understand the needs, the solutions, trying to identify the different media and the channels to which the people have access to. We are also trying to identify the M&E indicators. So now look at this interesting thing, that we are identifying the M&E indicators out here in the first stage. We are identifying the M&E indicators here in the communication based assessment stage, but we are look at this, the monitoring and evaluation comes here at the end. But we are seeing some part of it happening here as well as some part of it happening here. As well as in your previous slide, you will see that M&E is here as well as monitoring and evaluation is here. You will probably be able to understand more about this in our next section of the lecture. But if you are to proceed with this, so these are all the things which are happening at the communication based assessment level. So this is the situation analysis. This is where the communication based assessment is happening. Next comes the strategy design. That means we have formulated the objectives of the particular campaign, And now we are trying to do the strategy design. So we are designing the strategy. So here I am selecting the entire design. I'm identifying the communication appropriateness. I'm looking at how I'm going to manage my campaign. I'm looking at the learnings. So the different systems, how am I going to implement my strategy. Then after I have designed my strategy, I prepare my action plan and I get into the implementation stage. So that is where I carry out pre-testing, I do the media production, I understand, do the different training activities and the message dissemination. So here the dissemination through the different channels which have been identified happens at the implementation level. So this is the actual implementation of the C4D campaign. And at the end of it, we do the monitoring and evaluation. So if you are here trying to understand as to how your different courses for the MSc4D program are structured, like you are trying to understand the research, the monitoring and evaluation right now, you are trying to understand the different media which are available, and then later on you are getting into the campaign planning, which is basically the strategy design as to how you will design a particular strategy and then how you are going to implement it. But the process of monitoring and evaluation starts right here. Now, if we have to understand this particular stage of communication based assessment more clearly, let us go and move on to the next slide. So, communication based assessment is essentially the first step of any development initiative. So, this is the stage where I am trying to find out who are my people, what are the risks of the particular campaign, what are their needs, what are the opportunities of the particular project. So this is the first step of any development initiative. So here what happens is at this particular, so the CBA, communication based assessment, is the CBA which identifies, refines, validates or investigates the causes and differences in the positions, perceptions and knowledge held by various stakeholders relevant to a development initiative. Let us understand this part by part. So what we are trying to say here is that it identifies, it refines, it validates or it investigates. So it's about finding out what the causes and the differences in the positions and perceptions. Now here one thing we are understanding that there are multiple stakeholders into any communication campaign that we are planning. So when we are implementing a communication strategy in a particular context within a particular community, then there are multiple stakeholders. So what we are trying to understand as part of CBA is that why do people have certain positions and perceptions, the causes. And what are the differences between the positions and perceptions and knowledge of the different stakeholders? So within a particular project area, there are multiple stakeholders. It's very important that we understand, and we have continuously been talking about it, that when we are implementing a particular project within a particular community situation, then there are multiple stakeholders who play a role towards the success of a particular project, towards the effectiveness of a particular communication strategy that we are implementing. So these multiple stakeholders have multiple perceptions. They have different reasons as to why they hold on to those perceptions. So what a CBA does is, number one, it helps identifies the perceptions, the existing knowledge and the positions of these different stakeholders. It understands as to why they have those perceptions, the reasons behind those perceptions, and the differences in the perceptions between different stakeholders. So I am not only understanding the stakeholders but also their perceptions, the reason as to why they have those perceptions, and why do different stakeholders hold different perceptions. So all of that is being understood through research at the CBA level, the communication based assessment level. And when I do all of these things, what it ensures is the relevance and appropriateness of the project design. So until and unless I understand all my stakeholders, their risks, their concerns, I will not be able to design an effective communication campaign. And hence my campaign may not be relevant and appropriate for a particular community. So once I understand, do a comprehensive mapping of all the stakeholders, I understand what are their perceptions, what are the risk perceptions that they have. This would be also a level where I'm going to understand the different social norms held by a particular community. So once I understand all of that, then only my project is going to become relevant and appropriate for all these different stakeholders of my particular campaign topic. So it ensures the appropriate communication-based assessment ensures the relevance and appropriateness of a particular project design. It is a field research. So when I'm saying I'm trying to identify who are my stakeholders, what are their perceptions, what are their attitudes towards a particular thing. So it might be an attitude towards vaccination, it might be an attitude towards a particular health behavior, it might be an attitude towards adopting a particular agricultural practice, it might be a particular practice of nutrition. So what are their attitudes, what are the social norms? So if I have to understand all of these in a project location, it is obviously a field research. So it is a field research. So CBA, communication based assessment, which happens at the beginning of any particular campaign, of any particular development project implementation, is a field research. It identifies project and communication objective. So once I understand who my stakeholders are, what are their perceptions, then I am in a position to identify the specific objectives, not only for the broad project, the entire project, the development project, but also of the communication strategy that I am going to implement for the project. You have to understand here the two distinctions. The project need not necessarily always be a communication project. It might be a livelihood project, it might be an education project, it might be a literacy project. So, but within that, I am using communication as a strategy of dialogue, as a strategy of trust building within the community. So hence, it identifies a proper CBA is going to help identify the project and communication objectives. Based on the findings of my CBA, I will be in a position to identify the project as well as the communication objectives in an appropriate manner. So the output of this step is the input for the next step, which is my strategy design. If I go back and if I look at what is the next step, is the strategy design. So in order to develop my strategy, I need all of these inputs in a particular campaign planning. So the CBA provides me with the input for my strategy design. So the output of this step, which is all these information that I have identified about my stakeholder, their perceptions, is the output of this CBA, which becomes the input for the next step. So now in this context, let us come to the social ecological model. You would remember that we have discussed this particular model, and this is something that we try to understand, that who are the stakeholders, as I say. So this is a primary framework as to where we are understanding, or the social ecological model comes handy for us. So here we identify that who are my primary, secondary, tertiary stakeholders and what type of strategies would be appropriate for me with the different stakeholders which are there. So what should be the communication strategy? Whether I am doing advocacy, I am doing BCC, I am doing SBCC, I am doing community mobilization. What would be my appropriate strategy for the different stakeholders which I identify for my particular project? So this also basically becomes a component of the first stage, which is the communication based assessment. So in this context, what we need to understand also are the different basic principles of C4D. Which are the different basic principles of C4D, which are as follows. So communication or C4D is basically dialogic. It is dialogic because we have already discussed about it, that dialogue is at the heart of all C4D processes. So development communication, we understand, has to foster dialogue to facilitate mutual understanding. It will help us to assess a situation and to seek wider consensus, wider agreement among different people. So dialogic approaches guarantee that relevant stakeholders have their voices heard and that the project priorities are aligned, are according to the priority of the people. So when I am having a project, the priorities of the project should be aligned to the priorities of the people. So that is the importance of dialogical communication, or the entire process being dialogic as part of a C4D campaign. The next point is that it has to be inclusive. Now inclusions, as I have already mentioned, is very important, because when I am talking about inclusion, it is trying to ensure that even the most marginalized sections of a particular community, there would be people within a particular community who might be silent, who might be dormant, the marginalized community, because they are not able to voice their opinion. So it's important that we include everybody. All the marginalized sections should be considered. So C4D essentially is a very, very inclusive process. It is heuristic. That means it has to be dependent on self-learning. A very important thing is that it should depend on people's exploration of their knowledge and their priorities. When it becomes a process of mutual learning, when it becomes a process of mutual sharing of knowledge and understanding, that makes a C4D process effective. So being or having that importance towards knowledge sharing, that self-exploration, that process of finding the solution from amongst yourself is a very important process in C4D. It has to be analytical. It has to be analytical in the sense that it is not a simplistic process. Communication function is not about, when we talk about C4D, it is not simply about delivery of messages. We have constantly said that communication for development is not simply about delivery of messages or relating messages, but it is about uncovering and generating knowledge to design better projects. So we are trying to uncover and generate knowledge through C4D to design better projects and programs that lead to sustainable change. So it is about an exploratory process. It is an analytical process. It tries to understand the different context. It tries to understand the people involved, and it tries to develop a better society, a better context. It is not simply about delivery of messages. We have to understand that C4D is not simply a one-directional delivery of messages, or it is also not about simply to get a feedback, but it is to improve the entire context within which the development process is happening. The next point is participatory, and there is no way that we can emphasize it less. We have been talking about the different types of participation, starting from consultation to self-management to empowerment. So there are different ladders. The different ladders of participation we have already discussed, and you already understand this very well. I believe it is also getting revised in other papers. So we essentially understand that a good or a successful C4D process essentially should try to ensure an optimum level of participation of all the stakeholders. It has to be contextual. Again, something which cannot be less emphasized, that different projects might have a lot of similarity in terms of the different steps that we have said, the CBA or the strategy design or the implementation. But we have to understand that people are different, communities are different, their realities are different, and hence contextualization. When I am designing a particular strategy, it has to look into the available resources within that particular context. So contextualization is extremely important in C4D. We cannot have generalized ideas that one size fits all, or we will have resources somewhere else and we will implement it somewhere else. So whatever strategy we have to design in C4D, it has to be contextual. It has to emanate from within a particular community. It has to be relevant to that particular community, and they have to be able to relate to it. So contextual being or making a particular C4D process contextual is extremely important. It is interdisciplinary. So we cannot say that because we are doing a C4D projects, communication is the only thing that we are going to understand. It is extremely interdisciplinary in the sense that you will have to have understanding of sociological perspectives, you will have to have understandings of anthropology, you will have to have understanding of different issues. Like you have to understand what is the meaning of nutrition, what are the issues of maternal health, what are the issues of environment, what are the issues and technicalities of livelihood. So all of these things are to be understood in order to develop a successful C4D strategy. So it is an extremely interdisciplinary process. We have to understand communication. Yes, that is the basic idea that we are looking at, but then we have to enrich our knowledge and understand that C4D or doing C4D is an interdisciplinary work. It is strategic. So what is strategic? Strategic means, in a very simple way, is to be able to complete a particular project within the definite time using a particular amount of resources which is available for us. So C4D is a strategic process. It is a plan to achieve set objectives with available resources in a given time frame. So often it occurs when practitioners jump into a strategy design without making sure that the objectives are technically sound. So I cannot jump into a particular C4D project without a particular plan. So I have to understand that there are specific resources, there is a specific time frame, and hence whatever work that we are planning to do, it has to be completed within a particular time frame. So that is the importance of something being strategic. So it's a planned activity. It is not an impromptu activity. It's a very, very planned activity. And the last thing about an effective C4D campaign is that it has to be persuasive. Now, let us understand that persuasion as such has a negative connotation where it borders on to manipulation. But in the context of C4D, we have to understand that persuasion is not to be taken as a negative thing. It is about informed choices or informed changes that people make in their lives. It is about persuading people to adopt certain changes, certain behavioral changes in their lives. It is a change which is based entirely on knowledge, entirely on information, and not on manipulation or misinformation. So hence we have to understand that persuasion in C4D is not to be understood as manipulation or in a negative connotation. Persuasion is important, and we are trying to persuade people to make certain informed changes in their behaviors. So hence C4D should be persuasive. Now in this context, we are seeing that in any development project, there is a huge importance of communication. There is a huge importance of persuasion, dialogue, participation. So in that, another thing that I would want to draw your attention towards, and which I believe we would have already discussed in some of the other papers, which is the Johari's window. So if you remember the Johari's window, window 1, 2, 3 and 4, the first window. This is important when we are doing our communication based assessment. All the things that I have been telling you about till now connects to the CBA stage only. Let me again clarify it, that all the things that we have been discussing till now is trying to look at the process from the CBA stage. So at the Johari's window, what do we see? Why communication is important? So open knowledge, that means what we know and they know. That means this is the first stage where we explore that what is there as an inherent knowledge within the community. That is the we. We is the people within the community, the stakeholder, the community, the people who are trying to look at the particular change happening within their own context. And they are basically the project facilitators, who are the outside agencies. So what we know and they know, that means what is common knowledge between both the parties. Our hidden knowledge, what we know and they do not know. That means this is the point where we try to explore what are the inherent knowledges and resources within a particular community. So what are the strengths of a particular community? What are the resources which are available within a particular community? What is the knowledge which is available within a particular community? So this is again a communication assessment phase. Next comes the third window, their hidden knowledge. That means what they know and we do not know. That means what knowledge is there or what resources are available outside the community and which is not available within the community. That is again a resource assessment, that what resources or knowledge or know-how or capacities can probably be brought within a particular context. And the fourth window, the blind spot, it is what neither we nor they know. This is where the strategy or the particular intervention is going to take us. This is the objective of the project. This is the plan. This is the work that we intend to do. That means the first three are the assessment stages. These all three are the communication assessment phases. This is where we frame our objectives. This is where we try and understand. The third or the last one is where we understand that what is the intention of the project. What does the particular project or what is the particular problem that the project needs to address. This is where we are able to identify the objectives or the intended change that we are trying to bring together. That means we and we together try to bring about the change. This is what we identify, that this is where we need to reach or this is where we need to arrive at. So this is how the basics, where I have tried to make you understand the context, the flow of a particular C4D project. And here you understand that there is a lot of research which goes into the first phase, which is our situation analysis, which is also called the communication based assessment. That means we understand the ground realities within which a particular project is supposed to be implemented. That's the first and the most important stage. So what you here need to understand or emphasize upon, and what we have been constantly talking about, that where does research fit into a particular project design, into a particular project flow or a project process, where does research fit in? So all the things as part of CBA that we have discussed today are to be found out through research. So research starts right in the beginning of a particular project design, and hence it is very important for us to be aware of the different techniques of research. So all the previous lectures that we have had till now, we have been trying to introduce you to the different tools, techniques and methods of research, and I believe you have attained sufficient clarity on the different research methodologies, and you will now be, or you are already now in a position to do this communication based assessment or the situation analysis for a particular project. And that is where you have to understand that where does research fit into a particular project design. It starts right away in the beginning. Without research, there is no C4D campaign which is going to happen. Research is an integral part of any communication design, and that's the reason it is very important. Any communication plan is going to fail until and unless we have a strong research backup of that. After this, I would want you to just check your progress through a few questions that I have put in, and I would want you to respond to me on these questions through email. So, the first question. Strategic communication tries to ensure presence of dialogue among stakeholders, timely completion of project within available resources, conduct of research in initial stage, all of the above. Can you give me the correct answer? The next question. The blind spot in Johari's window is about situation analysis, stakeholder perception, or intended change. Do you remember what we said? The next question. CBA is conducted at the beginning of the project, throughout the project period, at the beginning and at the end of the project, at the end of the project only. So I'm sure you will be able to answer these questions. That's all for today. We will meet again with the second part of the lecture on monitoring and evaluation, where I will provide you with an introduction to the concept of monitoring and evaluation. Thank you.